Hi, I'm Darlene Griffiths, and this is my report on A Good Teacher Turns Bad, the case study. Just a summary of the school that we're talking about. It's Crestview Elementary School. The principal, Mrs. Wilson, she was a teacher for 13 years and then became the principal at Crestview, and she's been there for 4 years. It sounds like they have a good staff, and they are proud of their school and their students. So what do I know about the principal, Mrs. Wilson? Well, in year one, she took her advice from her college professor, and she didn't rock the boat. Now, in year three, she's noticed a change in one of her teachers, and she's learned that that teacher, Mrs. Horton, is having some trouble at home. So year three passes, and the summer comes, and she hopes that Mrs. Horton's personal life gets worked out and resolved before year four. And so we come back in year four, and they are implementing a new reading strategy at the school, a new reading program, which Mrs. Horton disagrees with, and she must disagree with it very vehemently because she argues with other teachers about it and so forth, causing a disruption with the faculty. Mrs. Wilson, the principal, goes ahead and has a private conference with Mrs. Horton. And unfortunately, that private conference does nothing to change Mrs. Horton's behaviors. Then we're about 6 weeks into year four, and the principal starts receiving phone calls and letters from parents about Mrs. Horton. Then the superintendent calls because those same parents are not getting any results, and so now they're calling board members. And then she's getting ready to go talk to Mrs. Horton about these concerns when a parent comes in. So she decides to go ahead and schedule a parent meeting with this father. And when she and this father go in to meet with Mrs. Horton's not ready, and the meeting just escalates, and Mrs. Horton is somewhat out of control. So what do I need to know about the principal, Mrs. Wilson? Well, the first thing is she didn't address the issue with Mrs. Horton during year three. She could have addressed the issue right away, but she didn't. She allowed Mrs. Horton to argue with the other teachers and cause discontent. She also just wished that the problem would go away over the summer rather than dealing with it. Then she goes on and she has this private conference with Mrs. Horton, but the behavior does not change. Things seem to be getting worse. So I want to know, why does she wait until she's getting phone calls and letters from parents before she goes and confronts Mrs. Horton? Why does she wait for the superintendent to call and say, hey, what's going on with this teacher? Why didn't she deal with this immediately? So I believe the problem is that the principal, she waited too long to address the problem with Mrs. Horton. She should have taken it on and dealt with it immediately. She should have intervened in year three, not waited. So the plan of action, here's what I would think. Mrs. Wilson, the principal, should have intervened when she noticed the changes in Mrs. Horton. She should have acted upon it, had that private meeting with her to discuss the concerns, especially with her arguing with the other teachers and disagreeing with curriculum decisions. Curriculum decisions are building-wide, and everybody needs to be on board to promote that with the students and implement it successfully. She could have offered Mrs. Horton some empathy when she found out that Mrs. Horton was having trouble at home. But also Mrs. Wilson, the principal, needed to document all these incidents and meetings with Mrs. Horton. What is going on? Have that documentation from the first time all the way through. So step two, if the problem persists toward the end of year three, then Mrs. Wilson, the principal, needs to evaluate the issues, meet again with Mrs. Horton, tell her that she hopes that she will fix her personal problems and return to that teacher of the year caliber that she was before. And if not, then we're going to have to move on to step three. So step three is going to happen in year four. When Mrs. Wilson receives those phone calls and letters from parents, she should go in right away, talk to that teacher, maybe set up a formal evaluation and some walkthroughs to see what's going on. And then offer opportunities for that teacher to improve. Maybe you offer for Mrs. Horton to go to another first grade teacher's classroom in the district and see what's going on over there. Maybe she's not sure of what she's doing. Maybe she's never taught this grade before, something like that. So give her those professional development opportunities. Send her to something about stress, how to deal with stress in the classroom, or some exercises that she and the students could do to lower their stress levels. And then after offering those opportunities for improvement, reevaluate her in the spring. If you've seen improvement and she's getting back on track, then we'll keep her at the school. If not, we're going to have to let Mrs. Horton go because she is upsetting the other teachers. The students are upset, parents are upset. We just are going to have to let her go. So what is best for the students? Well, obviously the concerns have to be addressed immediately. Okay, you cannot wait and hope that they go away. You don't want to move those students to another classroom because that'll just make that teacher even more angry. Help that teacher improve. Okay, what can you do to help her improve in that classroom? Talk to the students, see what's going on. You've heard that the truth comes from the mouth of babes. Talk to those elementary students. They're going to tell you what's going on. Encourage Mrs. Horton to not ignore those parents' concerns, to address them right away, whether it's making a phone call, emailing them, meeting with them. Offer to sit in on meetings. Maybe she needs some practice on parent-teacher meetings. Do a mock parent-teacher meeting with her and just help her be ready for those things. And then what's best for students is that reading program. They agreed that that was the best program. Is it being implemented by all the teachers, including Mrs. Horton? So in my debrief, you asked about emotions. Well, my first emotion was to relate to the teacher, Mrs. Horton. Then I started thinking about the principal, Mrs. Wilson. I valued the experience of Mrs. Horton. She had been Teacher of the Year, but she was just blatantly disregarding what the principal was asking her to do. She was just going off on her own and arguing with everyone and just upsetting everyone. So you need to put a stop to that behavior before it infects the entire school. We're talking the faculty, the staff, even the students can feel when something is not right. So some unresolved issues that I thought. You're going to have to talk to Mrs. Horton about checking her personal life at the door. She's got to separate her personal life from her professional life. And then will she return to that Teacher of the Year caliber? I don't know. That's a decision that she will have to make. Will Mrs. Wilson have to let Mrs. Horton go, or will she improve? And even though Mrs. Horton disagreed with the reading program, did she implement it or did she not? So that's another question that I would want to have answered. So how would I promote academic success for every student? Well, every classroom should have a caring and nurturing teacher in it, especially at the elementary school. Those kids just need all the love that that teacher can give them. Is that classroom conducive for learning? Is it a friendly classroom? Is it a safe classroom? If there's that verbal abuse and embarrassment going on, then no, it's not safe and it's not the place that those kids want to be. And then, has the effective implementation of that new reading program? Has she done what she needed to do? Or is she still dragging her feet? And then the personal well-being of every student. Well, if I'm looking out for the students in Mrs. Horton's classroom, I want to address that issue immediately. I don't want to wait for it to escalate. I want to address it right away. And to build that cohesive faculty or team feeling, you can't have one bad apple spoiling the rest. You've got to address that. You've got to get that issue solved so that you can work together to meet the goals that you've set for your school. I would visit with the students. I want to know, what are the students seeing? What are they feeling? Is it a place that they want to be? Because we want all kids to want to come to school, and we want them to come with this just thirst for knowledge. And how would I enhance instructional capacity? Well, again, you got to address the issue immediately. You're going to have to build that faculty team back up, especially if they've been kind of torn down by one individual that just disagrees with everyone. Make sure that that new reading program is implemented by all, not just a few, but everybody. Everybody's got to be on board with it. Again, visit with the students to see whether things are improving or whether they're staying the same or getting worse. Make sure that every classroom has that caring teacher, that nurturing person in there to help those kids grow. And then offer professional development that promotes our school goals. What is our school trying to accomplish, and does our professional development help that, or is it just a sideline thing that we have to do? We want it to be in line with our goals so that we're not wasting our teachers' times. And then we want to involve parents in a positive way, because based on the story here, the parents were not getting the kind of input and information that they needed to help their students. So we want to involve those parents in a positive way. We want to have that communication. So I believe the main problem here was just dealing with Mrs. Horton from the beginning, addressing that issue, and then working to resolve that issue so she could get back to the caliber that she once was. Thank you.